Scott, and thanks for joining me again today for another episode of the RockLove Magazine Podcast, where we discuss the magazine that ran between 1995 and 2001, celebrating the music of that era, the music of all eras in music history, really, because we are music fans after all, making lists of our favorite things. I've been replaying a lot of interviews of people that we spoke with back then, and those were all never before heard interviews because they were done on tape, but for written articles. And then the most fun we're having is reconnecting with people and doing some live interviews today. And today we have one of our favorite people in the world on, who was a cover artist from RockLove Magazine. The whole thing is just so funny now, 30 years ago. But one thing that's not funny is the music. So Stevie Salas, who, if you don't know, you will by the end of this, he's one of the most talented people on the planet, is here joining me. And I'm gonna put it out there and say, this is the second time we're doing this because I fucked up something on the mixing board last week. I am not a studio engineer like Stevie and all of his cohorts, and so I don't know what happened, and he graciously is doing this with me again. So, hey, man.
Hello. Yeah, no problem. I mean, we all have our share of mistakes, and I'm no tech either. I'm a tech idiot, so. So
okay, now you just took me down a new path already. So what do you do in the studio when shit arises?
You know, I'm an ear guy. I'm a song guy. I've never wanted to be. I was a staff producer for David Kirschenbaum in 1987. I was producing records before I had a record deal. David Kirschenbaum, who's the famous A&R guy record, he'd signed Joe Jackson and he signed, Supertramp. He was head of A&R at A&M Records in London. And he built a studio in LA called Power Tracks, where he did the big record he did was Tracy Chapman's first album. I was there when Tracy walked in the studio, but I was a staff producer there as a kid, before I was in Rod Stewart, before I got signed to Island, any of that stuff. And it's where I did the Bill and Ted soundtrack and a few other soundtracks because David Kirschenbaum was the music supervisor. So I always had an engineer. I started to learn how to engineer, but I found myself just isolating on kick drums and things. I wasn't listening to the whole thing, and to me, it took away. I needed to listen to music and listen to tiny details and not listen to the sonics of individual parts. So I never wanted to be an engineer. So I was that producer, and I listened, and I know how to write songs, and I had publishing deals with Polygram and Virgin and Island Music and writing songs for lots of other people. So that's why I'm not an engineer.
So then when things go wrong, what are you just like, I'll be over here, guys. Let me know when it's fixed.
I sit around. I'm telling you, something went wrong yesterday. I'm producing an act right now. And I had a superstar band in the studio a couple weeks in LA with Kim Bullard from Elton John on keyboards and Carmine Rojas, who put me in Rod Stewart's band, David Bowie's bass player on bass. Phil from Bon Jovi, as you know, Phil and I were playing guitars and I was producing, and Franklin Vanderbilt was playing drums. He was with Lenny Kravitz. And recently we sent the mixes over to Chris Lord-Alge to mix this week, and he sent them back saying, hey, these aren't prepped properly. So of course I'm like, I have no idea what he's talking about. So I had to call the engineer and send it to the engineers and blah, 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 blah. So yeah, these things happen all the time. The key to success, I think, for anybody in any field is be the dumbest guy in the room and surround yourself with the best quality people you can, because then you'll always, in the end, some people get insecure, especially in our business, where they want to be the baddest ass guy in the room. I want to be the stupidest guy in the room every time. You know what I mean? And I find that when I do that, I end up winning in the end always.
Okay, so now like I said, we went down a little excursion there at the beginning. So now I want to spend some time talking about some of the things I haven't seen you speak or interviewed as much about in the interviews you've done before, especially the things that are near and dear to us. The name of the magazine, RockLove, comes from a Todd Rundgren song and from Adventures in Utopia. But before we go down that road, I want to start with you and a gentleman who we are also in love with by the name of Bernard Fowler started this band Nickelbag together with the BAG, not the name of the Canadian band, everybody. And so I want to get into the whole story of the band and how Bill Laswell, the great producer, also helped bring you guys together. But I want everybody to take a look at the picture that's behind me. And we put these guys on the cover, and just look how gorgeous they look. Bernard with his dreads, and Stevie, I don't know if you were using hair gel or if we brought a fan with us that day. I don't remember. And so we were doing these fashion things in the magazine those days, and we would get clothes from local stores, from designers and whatnot, and bring them on these shoots and ask the artists to put them on, and some said yes and some said no. And so for this time, clearly the Bono wraparound fly sunglasses were popular to get, and we brought two of those, and look at these studs of these things. So, all right. So tell me how this all came together, and how Bill Laswell was a part of bringing you and Bernard together. And I know he did some work for you on one of your albums before all of this, but let's start walking us down that, because like I said, this is my favorite part of your career and doesn't get spoken about enough.
Well, what happened was, I had worked with Bill Laswell on my first album, Color Code. Originally, I started to work with Bill Laswell in '87 again, when I was working with Bootsy Collins on the What's Bootsy Doing album. But Bill didn't really need me on that record, because he was cutting in New York with Eddie Martinez, the great Eddie Martinez. And to tell you the truth, I was kind of an early clone of Eddie Martinez. Eddie was doing the Run DMC stuff, and of course he did the Robert Palmer, Addicted to Love, and he was the hottest session guy in New York. And he was doing, he did really amazing records. We was playing with Blondie, but I was really deep into what Eddie was doing with Run DMC and with Robert Palmer. And so Bill Laswell didn't really want me on that record. I ended up recording in Detroit with Bootsy on it, so I am on it quite a bit, actually. But later, I joined Rod Stewart, and then I came home from tour, and I'd signed this huge recording contract with Island Records while I was on tour with Rod. Actually, I kept it a secret forever. I didn't want anyone to know, because I don't want Rod to fire me, thinking I was going to leave. So I was wanting Nick Launay to produce my first record. Nick, because I was in love with the Midnight Oil records and the In Excess album, The Swing. And I loved it. I still, to this day, when I run it into Nick Launay, I wish that I could have worked with him. But he wanted me to go down to Australia for 3 or 4 months, and my record company was like, "You ain't going to Australia on your own for 3 months. We'll never see you again." Because I was out of my mind. I was surfing every day and doing my usual madness with girls and all the other stuff I was doing. And Bill Laswell heard the demos and called Island Records, said, "I want to do the record." And not only did he say that, he said, "I'm going to do the record, and I want to do it and have them here on June 6th and blah, blah, blah." It was like, oh, God. And Bill Laswell wasn't known for making hits, but Bill Laswell was this guy like Soundgarden. Everybody wanted to work with Bill Laswell. He had a big hit with Herbie Hancock, Rocket, but he was the kind of guy that could work with Miles Davis and then turn around and work with Africa Bambaataa and Johnny Lydon. He did the "I'm in a time zone." I mean, I love this shit. And so when Laswell called, I went, and I started off with Color Code, which was critically acclaimed. And then Laswell called me, and we did Hardware with me, Buddy Miles on drums, and Bootsy Collins on bass, which was crazy. And during the Hardware album, I was still a little kid, remember? I was really young. I always wanted to work with Bernard Fowler, and I knew Bernard Fowler had worked a ton with Bill Laswell. Bill Laswell kind of was responsible for us all knowing Fowler, because Bill Laswell was producing Mick Jagger and put Bernard on that Mick Jagger record with Doug Wimbish, and later on I would do Mick Jagger with Bernard too as well. But
and he'd also sung with Ozzy and Motorhead and Iggy Pop. I mean, think of how diverse.
Yeah, this might have been before he did that, because this was still like 91, 92. Okay. So I wanted Bernard Fowler to help me sing and teach me how to be a better singer, and also help me with background vocals on the Hardware album with Buddy Miles, Bootsy Collins. George Clinton was on it, Mudbone Cooper was on it, Bernie Worrell was on it. And so Laswell called Bernard, and he was in Ireland producing Ronnie Wood's record from the Rolling Stones, because Bernard was already in the Stones. He was already in the Rolling Stones. And but he goes, "I'm flying to New York Tuesday. So he flew into New York, came and met me at Greenpoint Studio in Brooklyn, and we just started recording. And me and Bernard just were like this instantly, like we were like brothers, like instantly, just like, I don't know, him and I were both so much alike, because he was always the young guy with that group of musicians. And now I was younger than him and I was the young guy. And both of us kind of always felt like we were surrounded by these super famous old legends all the time. Everybody was way older than me and him. And so we just started hanging out. We did the Hardware album. And then what happened was I went to London with Terence Trent D'Arby, the artist formerly known as Terence Trent D'Arby. His name's Sananda Maitreya, but he was called Terence Trent D'Arby then, and everybody knew him. He had these massive records that sold like 12 million copies, Sign Your Name Across My Heart and Wishing Well and all that shit. And I was Terence's music director, and I was working on his albums, playing guitar on his stuff. And I was in London doing a bunch of TV shows and all that, studio shit in London. And I had to go back to California, but I was trying to finish an album for Polygram. My second album was called Back from the Living, Color Code, but I wasn't done with it. It took me 4 years to make that record. And so in between, I made an album of covers called The Electric Powwow, which a lot of people know because it sold really big. And I had all kind of guest guitar players, guest drummers, guest singers. And so I asked Bernard if he would sing a song on it. And he said, of course. So I wanted to do a cover of the song called The Groove Line by Heatwave. So I stopped in New York City on my way to LA from London, and I booked the Beastie Boys studio. They had this cool little studio, and they had a drum set in there with just 3 microphones, I think. It was really super lo-fi, and I was super into that lo-fi madness in 92, because nobody was doing it. Everybody was using this super, super produced, hyper-produced, big production, Little Mountain, Bob Rock, all these guys were doing these amazing sounding records.
Well, because by then the equipment's allowing you to do a Phil Spector wall of sound type of thing a lot easier, right? So now everybody's doing it.
I don't know that it was the Phil Spector thing. What it was these engineers were geniuses. Grayson Casaro, Bob Rock, Nick Launay. They were doing this stuff and creating these drum sounds like the Power Station drum sound and the Robert Palmer, David Bowie, Modern Love. That, I mean, you didn't hear sounds like that, and those didn't. Now you can do that with a couple of plugins, but back then you had to have like 25 microphones and gates going. It was a mathematical, bunch of madness. And so no, only the great engineers could get those sounds. And a lot of the engineers were going opposite, thinking, how did we get those sounds in the 60s or whatever? And I went to the Beastie Boys studio, and the engineer was super cool. I wish I could remember his name. He was really cool. And I called Brian Tishy to come in from New Jersey, and he played the drums. We had three mics on the drums, and we had TM Stevens come in and play bass, and I grabbed a guitar amp and just plugged it in. It was super lo-fi, and Bernard came in to sing, and we did a version of the song called The Groove Line. Bernard sang the shit out of it. It was just amazing. Super lo-fi. If you find that version on Electric Powwow, it's super lo-fi, but it's got this insane energy. And we did it. I split New York, stayed in touch with Bernard. The record came out. I was on tour with Duran, and The Groove Line went to number 3 in Japan on the Hot 100. It was like, what the fuck? Because I'm not a guy who makes hits. I make cool records and the critics like them, but I don't really make hits. Well, I have, thank God. But when I make a record, I'm trying to think of back then I wasn't trying to make a hit. I was just trying to make something cool that people would dig and it influence people. So The Groove Line goes to number 3. I call Bernard Fowler, and I'm like, dude, this shit is like on fire. And he's like, oh my God, we can see the chart on Billboard. And East West Records came to me. I left Island Records at that point, and I was still signed to Polygram in Japan, I believe. But the record company East West with Warner Brothers, my A&R guy, Steve Pross, who signed me to Island, was now working there. And he said, Stevie, he goes, if you could make a rock band with any musician in it that you want, because by this point I was getting known I was playing with the best musicians in the world. I mean, Tony Williams would call me to play, and I didn't even know who he was, and he was Miles's drummer, and Bill Laswell would go, just fucking say yes. It's like, okay, I don't know who he is, but I'll do it. I was working with Jeff Healey writing songs. I was working with all the biggest rock stars in the world were calling me, and I was working with them on their things and having a pretty good time with this respect that I was getting from my peers who I had just worshipped. And so they said, if you could put a band together with anybody you want, who would you do? Who would you do? And I said, okay, let me try. So I took a big whack of money from them, and I went to New York, and I rented an apartment, and I started writing songs with Bernard Fowler, who was my favorite singer. And knowing that in 1993,
can I interrupt you a second? Tell us why. Why is he your favorite singer? Like, what's so good? I mean, I know. I mean, but what? Tell the audience.
No, because there's a lot of great singers. I mean, you can see that wall back there's full of great singers. But I like stylists more than perfect singers. And Bernard's depth of music. He was an African American guy who grew up listening to the Beatles and the Stones. Obviously, he's been in the Rolling Stones for 40 years or whatever. But he also he understood soul music. So like on the Nickelback stuff, I could say when I'm writing this chorus, I'm saying I'm hearing Jack Bruce and Cream right here, and he'd be like, oh yeah, I hear that, because he knew it. He knew everything. And I'd say like, this one sounds like the Isley Brothers. You go, oh yeah, he could do it, right? He understood everything. The same thing with Terence Trent D'Arby. He was insane to work with. I loved working with him so much. As much as I loved working with George Clinton or Bootsy and those guys. So Bernard singing, not only did he have this exceptional amount of soul, he had this heart. He wasn't a perfect singer, but his heart would come through the vocal. Like you'd feel his emotion, you could feel his pain or feel his power. And I just like that. I like that. I don't need to have a perfect singer. When I worked at American Idol, I worked with these guys who were perfect singers. And quite honestly, most of the people on the show didn't have any soul of their own. They were just really had this perfect vehicle. But every God needs a devil to stay in business. And a perfect singer is like a perfect diamond. It's not good. Every great diamond has a flaw. And a lot of those great singers on the TV shows have no flaws. Therefore, it just doesn't work. It's not real, right? Fowler was real. Fowler was the kind of guy that, I one time found him in a hotel lobby with a cigarette burnt down to his feet when he was passed out in front of the elevator with people stepping over him, and people were freaking out. Like, what are we going to do with this guy? That's my kind of guy. You never know if he's going to drive a car through a wall or if he's going to buy you a new car. I love that kind of human being, and he's that guy. So knowing that if I put a rock band together with a black singer, this may sound crazy to people now, but I knew damn well it was not going to be an easy thing. But we were out to change the world. And I said, I don't give a shit. I am going to do this. I always had an African American. Winston A. Watson was in my band, and he was black, and I'm Native American, and my bass player CJ from Color Code was white. I didn't set out to put a perfect band together that fit the motif of what was going on with Bon Jovi and everybody, because they had that shit down. That was good. That was their thing. I was trying to break new ground with people of color, not because I was trying to have a gimmick of people of color. It's just that I found that people of color just had more rhythm and more shit that I liked. And that's why white guys were always trying to sound like black guys since the early days. So I said, well, why shouldn't I try when I can just go right to the source, right? And I put the band together with Bernard. Lonnie Hillier from Maggie's Dream was playing bass. And originally Zach Alfred, who was with Bowie at the time, I think, was playing drums. And then we switched to Brian Tishy. And that's why we did this band Nickelback. And that's what happened is a record company gave me a bunch of money to put a band together. And that's what I did.
Okay, so tell me about the approach of picking the songs for the album, some of which are written, three of which are covers: a Stevie Wonder song, a Clinton song, George Clinton song, and a garbage tune. So about that, and then didn't that record label go away at some point? And then Iguana had to pick, at least in the U.S., and Iguana had to pick you back up. And well, it's all happening in Japan again. So you have this unique success in Japan. Now, I shouldn't say unique. A lot of American artists have this success. Japan has a real appreciation for our rock and roll.
Yeah, I mean, If you see that whole top row of all those right there, those are all Japanese gold and platinum albums. I did huge business in Japan. Thank God. I mean, thank the gods, because a lot of times during the lean years, I could go there and make $500,000 and I could live and I could create what I wanted to create and didn't have to take a job playing on the Love Boat or some shit, you know? So, I don't know. But the thing is that we went into the studio. I flew to New York and rented an apartment to write with Bernard. And the first song I brought him was Love Song, which was the first single on the record, it's called Love Song All Up in My World. And we knew we had something really special with that song. So I went in the studio and I cut 5 songs with Jason Casaro engineering and me and Fowler, me and Bernard producing. And we weren't thinking so much. When we thought about covers, it was only because we loved the songs. It wasn't like this will be a hit. He wanted to do the song I'm Only Happy When It Rains because he loved that Garbage record. And we thought, I was in the studio in New York with Brian Tichy on drums, Doug Wimbish on bass, myself on guitar, and I came up with that. Bernard goes, I'd love to do this song. So I came up with that wow, wow, with my wah wah, and Tissue's and Wimbish was like it was like super funky, and it was like I'm only happy. It was like he was singing the melody, but we had this shit going on that was like Sly and the Family Stones underneath. And for us, it was fun. So we didn't know if anybody would like it or anybody. We just thought it was dope, and so we did that. And we did George Clinton Hit It and Quit It because Bernard always wanted to do that song. And of course, George Clinton's who discovered me, and I started with George. So I'm a George. I drink the George Kool-Aid because George gave me a shot when nobody knew who I was. And started my career. And the Stevie Wonder cover. What happened was I was in London in 92 or 93. And I was in a rehearsal studio with Terence Trent D'Arby again. And we put a makeshift band together, Terence and I. Wasn't our regular band. So we used a bass player from the band, Roachford. And I forget who else was with us. But we were in a rehearsal studio, because I remember because it was the first time I met Jimmy Page, because Jimmy Page was rehearsing with Paige Coverdale next to us. And everybody wanted to meet Terence Trent D'Arby because he was a superstar and hot, and everywhere. And Jimmy Page came over to meet Terence and myself, and it was really, really cool. We got to meet Jimmy Page, and it was really great for the first time. Maybe I've seen him a million times since, but pretty cool. So in that studio, I had never heard "I Don't Know Why I Love You" by Stevie Wonder, and I didn't even know the Stones did it either. But we did it, and he was singing it, and I just figured out the chords in the key of G, because it's not in the key of G, but in the key of G, I could play it like Jimi Hendrix, with all that shit on it. And so I start playing it, doing all that Hendrixian madness. And Terence was, I don't know. And I just got, God damn, that's fucking awesome. So I always remembered we were doing that in that jam room with Terence. And Terence, who he was called at the time, I don't want to disrespect him. His name's Sananda. And so we.
So was that his first exposure to Bernard, and what did he think? Because Bernard's when you see him the first time, it's like, wow.
Oh, who, Terence? No, everybody knew who Bernard.
Everybody
Fowler was.
knew Bernard. Okay.
He was the lead singer of Tackhead, who was big in London already, and he was working with all the biggest dogs in London. He was living in London, and him and Wimbish were already legends, and he had already done Mick Jagger, and he was in the Rolling Stones already since 1988. No, everyone knew who Bernard Fowler was. Everyone still knows who Bernard Fowler is. He's that guy. No, everybody knew Bernard. So what happened was I played that version for Bernard, and I didn't say it's because I did it with TTD in London the year earlier or whatever. I just said, check this out. And then he had just started singing it. And the funny thing is, when we recorded the song, he was having a really tough time getting a take. We were in Los Angeles cutting at this time. And John X was engineering, and Bernard was singing it, and it just wasn't swinging. And he was under a lot of stress because the next morning he had to fly to Brazil to meet the Rolling Stones, because he didn't fly down to Brazil with the Rolling Stones. He stayed with us, and we bought him a flight so he could get to Brazil because he needed to finish some vocals. And so he was under a lot of stress, and he was singing it. It just wasn't great. It just was good, but it wasn't like that extra magic that's on that record. And all of a sudden, this girl, this good-looking girl that we knew, walks in, and she was in a band with Kathy Valentine. In fact, she lives here in Austin, Texas now. And but she walks in the studio for some reason and says something to John X or me, and Bernard sees her, and instantly he starts performing because there's this beautiful girl in the studio, and that's the take that's on the record. It's like it sucked good, and she walked in, and he just flipped a switch. It was like, I don't know, and he just was like, you know, I watched him do that in the past where he doesn't know a person, and he'll just start staring at him and singing, and somewhere in his mind he gets in his place. He did that
He
once. We were in
creates like an
Mexico.
instant muse in his mind.
We were in Mexico City one time, okay, and with the Rolling Stones, we were down there with the Stones, and we actually went in the studio and recorded the solo for Hot Sod for Nowhere on the Nickelback album with Ronnie Wood while we were down there. But we were there with the Stones, and after the concert, him and I ended up like we used to. We found this club, this club that was only like after hours. It was probably 3 or 4 in the morning, and all of Mexico City's most coolest filmmakers and artists and painters and musicians and actors in this place. And everybody's sitting around and everybody's like Frida Kahlo kind of shit. And me and Fowler are sitting at our own table and everyone knew who we were. And there was a band playing and everybody's just doing their thing. And Bernard smoking a cigarette and we're drinking a lot of tequila, maybe even doing drugs. I don't remember. But he was like, Stevie, we go and play some blues? And I'm like, yeah. So the band was playing it. The band didn't have a PA. Nobody was singing. It was just drums, bass, guitar. And they were just playing instrumental shit. And so I walk up and the guitar player hands me the guitar and I start playing Little Red Rooster, the intro. And Bernard's out in the audience like an Elvis Presley movie, you know, and he just stands up in the middle of all those tables and just starts singing. Has anybody heard the Little Red Rooster? And like full voice, just like singing, no microphone. And we just kick in and we're playing. And he was walking through the restaurant. He's looking at people and he jumps on top of the table. Is anybody playing? And he's just doing his thing. And the crowd's just like floored. And he's walking through the thing. Like, remember when Elvis would be, hey, Rusty, you want to sing? When Elvis grabbed the mic and start, he start rocking the house. He was walking through that place like a cat. He was singing this shit, and people were just like, oh. And we finished the song. He walks over, sits back down at the table, didn't look at anyone, didn't say a word, takes a cigarette. And it was like, that's Bernard Fowler right there, man. He lit that fucking place up, singing, didn't ask for one clap, didn't look for people, hey, everybody, here I am. He was just like, sang it, walked back to his table and sat down and started smoking. And if you know Bernard, those are the elements of magic that like Keith Richards and Jagger know and everybody knows. Bernard is that guy that can do those things. And I've never known another singer that would ever have done that.
Okay.
That's Bernard Fowler.
Cool. All right. So let's talk about the album a little bit more. First of all, talk about the album cover. Everybody, again, I'm playing the album cover behind us. This is a really unique cover. What were you trying to accomplish? A, between the monotone. B, is there any thing racially you're trying to prevent? You know, what amazes me about some of this stuff is musicians are amongst the least racist and prejudicial. You know, it's about how good a musician you are. Yet, you know, it doesn't extend out to the rest of us in society. But what was the whole purpose of that album cover? Was it art or was it something more than art?
I had learned from always playing with amazing African musicians like P-Funk and those guys, and also, you know, with Winston in my band, I'd noticed that critics would often bring up skin color. I was not stupid. Living Color was a band that was for African American guys, and it was talked about a lot. It wasn't like they never talked about where's Nikki Sixx from? You know, oh, is he Norwegian descent? You know, nobody talked about that. But when it was an African American or you know, Los Lobos or whatever, it is what it is, man. Everybody, I'm not gonna ever say that I wasn't successful due to racism, but I'm not going to say that it wasn't there and it wasn't thick. It just wasn't thick. Well, it's funny now, you know, 100 years later, I mean, now it's more clear than ever, you know, But it was weird. If you were a black artist, they expected you to be marketed to black radio. If were like a crossover, like Herbie Hancock doing Rocket, crossing into alternative music and DJ music, or Billy Cobham Spectrum, where DJ starts sampling it. I mean, but those were like flukes, right? Those were the dream, really, that you could cross over all these. When Symphony or Damn came out with Terence Trent D'Arby, his dream was to have one song go number one on black radio and one song go number one on KROQ, and we did it. We had She Kissed Me when it was blowing up on K-Rock, on alternative, the number one alternative station, and Do You Love Me Like You Say was blowing up on black radio. So always you think about these things. But I knew from my manager, Morty Wiggins, at Bill Graham when I was younger. He managed Ivan Neville, and Ivan Neville made this amazing record called If My Ancestors Could See Me Now. I think it came out in 1988 and maybe 87, 88 on Polygram. And they purposely didn't put Ivan's picture on the album cover. And I remember asking why, and they didn't want radio to listen to the song after seeing the photos. They wanted them to listen to the music first. And so when we went and did Nickelbag, I made sure that our photos, I said, we're going to do something different. We're going to paint our faces silver, like mannequins almost like, because it was a definite rock and roll record. And it was pretty heavy, and it was kind of ahead of its time in 94. It was right in there, actually, before it became trendy. We were right on it. And we painted our faces silver. So you couldn't tell that I was Native American, and you couldn't tell that he was black. You just saw these faces, shapes of our faces painted in silver. And that's why we did it. And it worked at first. So Love Song came out and got added to a ton of radio stations. And people were like, this is amazing, and it was starting to blow up at radio. And then I had the unfortunate reality check when I got on the phone with my old radio promotion guy, Dave Darris. They used to call him Rambo. David and I were on the phone, and he was like, hey man, that song's really awesome. It's blah, blah. He goes, I see it starting to take off at radio, rock radio. And that's the dream, right? It was Bernard's dream to have a rock and roll rock and roll record, be a rock singer. That's really what he wanted. I mean, he's in the Rolling Stones, and I don't know how many years now, and still he has to fight for that dream, which is weird because the Rolling Stones are the greatest rock and roll band that ever lived, right? So Dave Darris calls up a big program director, radio promo guy somewhere in the country, and he goes, just be quiet. I don't want him to know you're on the call. Just be quiet and let's see what he says. So he calls up and he goes, hey, blah, blah, blah. What do you think of that song by Nickelbag, Love Song? That thing's amazing, isn't it? He goes, man, that song is amazing. And it sounds like it's got wheels, He goes, but what do you think? You think America's ready for 2 rock and roll bands with a black singer? And I knew right then. We were done. And that's what he was talking about. It no longer was talking about the music. It wasn't talking about the song. It was talking about the fact that was America ready for 2 rock bands on rock radio with black singers, meaning you already had Living Colour, which means, that's total racism. We got to keep those guys in their place. And it really sucks. And I'm not a guy who's racist. I hate that shit because I don't want to be a victim, and I don't need an excuse. I've spent a lot of time in Indian country doing shit with my native friends, that putting water filtration systems in villages where they have no water and not waiting for the government. We do all kinds of stuff, but I don't televise all that, and I don't talk about it, and I'm not pointing fingers, but it was for real. And when I told Bernard Fowler that, he broke down and cried because he tried everything to make this perfect, amazing fucking rock record that could change everything. And it just crushed him. It crushed his soul. And I'll never forget that. Never forget that.
He, so when we spoke to both of you 30 years ago now, we had tea with him at the Ritz-Carlton in San Francisco, and he relayed that same story to me and said he even thought for a while about quitting music, that's how hard it hit him.
Is it about music anymore? People don't realize you can play whatever music you want if you're a musician. But if you want to be in the music business, it's a business, and you got to dance. I mean, it's a business. You got to dance in any business, and it's a business. I mean, but the thing that sucks is that song was blowing up on radio without anybody knowing anything about any of this. The music was doing it, and the music got squished, and everybody lost, including America, because I mean, let's face it, but African American people, you can understand when there's a white person that's doing R&B, they make a big deal about that too. All this stuff about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and putting like Missy Elliott in it, that's just ridiculous. Are you trying to just please people, or are you just trying to get a bigger TV audience? It starts to become like everybody's a pawn in somebody else's game. Missy Elliott shouldn't be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. No disrespect for her. She should be in the Hall of Fame for whatever it is she does and her style and what her audience is. It's not rock and roll, and no disrespect to her, but let's be real. And, but if you use her that way, then she's a pawn in some big scam and some big game going on too. And then if you do that to Bernard Fowler at Rock Radio and you'll try to keep him in his place, it's another big bunch of bullshit too. So,
especially when the talent speaks for itself. So, okay. So then, but the album did well in Japan. Yes. Even though like it sputtered in the US, it did well in Japan.
It did well in Europe too. It did well in a lot of places, but Europe's cool. In Europe, it's so cool because in Europe, they don't judge you what's your next hit. They love the artist and they follow the artist. And people have always loved me there, always in England and Europe. And they've always loved Bernard. And we can go over there and tour and play whatever we want, kind of. People come and all cool music. The cool thing about us is always cool musicians come, like super hip cool musicians like to come. And probably because, Bernard's association with the Rolling Stones, because often when we would play, and one of the Stones would show up, it'd be just madhouse, right? It'd be nuts, but
So over the years, have you guys ever talked at all about doing any sort of reunion shows or doing another Nickelback album, or does it come up, or was it just too tough of an experience?
I don't have. We recorded a few more songs, but I really had it in me to write those songs when I went to Bernard. I wrote all that music and had those melodies and things, and I haven't had it in me to do it because I don't have a home for it. Now, if a record company said, Stevie, here's some money, go make one, then I'd start focusing. Like when Kosi Inaba calls, I don't start writing songs until I have a vehicle for them. It's like having a child that is going to be homeless. I don't do it, and if somebody said, Stevie, we got a budget here, can you make another Bernard album with Bernard? I'd figure out how to do it. But I don't want to just go do it and then put it on the internet or something. So I haven't released another Stevie Salas album. I had a record contract pretty much since 1988 till probably well, I still have one in Japan, but I don't even have one in Japan. I just have one for my one project, really. I lost my solo deal there in 2015 maybe, or 2013, I don't know. But I always used to have a record deal, so I could always get money to go do it right. I don't want to record in my bedroom, and I don't want to do that. I need to do it right and the way it's inspiring for me. So,
okay, that's a good segue for me now. So, before I move on, tell me a little bit more about that, about working it today versus 30 or 40 years ago working it. There was no internet. There was no cell phone. Like you had to like go out to clubs and shit every night. Like how much has that whole thing changed how you work and promote yourself compared to what you did when we were kids?
I don't really know anymore because I don't do any of that. I never was a guy that I used to go out every night to meet people and do things, but I didn't go out it wasn't like so much for promo. In LA in the early days, you had to know what nights. Same in London. In England, you had to know what nights you go to the WAG on Monday and Cafe de Paris on Thursday or whatever it was. But these days, I feel bad for kids. I don't know what the hell they do. Even when I worked at American Idol, it seemed like that was like an outlet that wouldn't necessarily lead to success because only a couple of them it was. Like Daughtry was a real artist, and we were able to make a real record with him and a real band and put him on the road and did it he sold 5 million records and had a career. Where Jordan Sparks to me was one of the greatest voices I've ever heard. And I knew Mariah Carey pretty well back then, and I knew people. And our first record sold 2.2 million records. And, 2 years later, she lost her record deal. If I sold 2 million records in 1990, I'd probably still have a record contract today. So things were changing quickly in the 2000s. The loyalty I noticed, like we talked about in Europe, how they have a loyalty to the artist. In America, they have a loyalty to the hit. And then during the 2000s, once it was TV shows, American Idol and that stuff, I realized that the loyalty was not to the artist on Idol.
To the moment.
To the show. It was to the show. So, I remember David Cook was starting to take over and do really well on my third season there. And my phone would ring off the hook. What do you think of David Cook? What do you think of David Cook? David Cook. Oh my God, he's so cute. David Cook, David Cook, David Cook, David Cook, David Cook, David Cook. Sure shit, and he's going to win. He wins. I take David Cook. Can I go see David Cook on Letterman? Can I go see David Cook on blah, blah? Can I come see David? I want to meet David Cook. I want to meet David Cook. David Cook, David Cook, David Cook. The new season starts. Wow, that Adam Lambert. He's something different. Never again would they ask about the year before Idol. Never. They would only talk about that season. Then it was Adam Lambert, Adam Lambert, Adam Lambert, Chris Allen, Adam Lambert, Chris Allen, Adam Lambert. And I realized that people's loyalty was to the show, not the artist. That's why the artist would go sell 1 million records, sell a bunch of tickets, and then kind of go off in the House of Blues land, and that's not a recipe for success for an artist. That was a bummer too. But
so
I went on that show,
what's the difference about the few that have made it? Adam and Daughtry and Carrie Underwood and Kelly.
Adam didn't make it on Idol. Adam was going to be the biggest artist that they ever had. We were ready to ship. We were shipping 1.2 million records on that first week on a Sunday. It might have been a Monday. It was a Sunday. I don't remember. I was hired. I was his music director, and I was hired to MD the final performance on Dick Clark's American Music Awards. And it was a big deal for me because, I was getting to be the music director on this big TV show for the closing number. And so I got Mike Garson from David Bowie to put this amazing piano shit together. We created this intro for Adam, and we did this whole thing. And during the show, if anyone remembers, Adam decided, without telling anybody, that he and the bass player were going to have a makeout session in the middle of the song. And their tongues were, and who gives a shit? Like, we don't care.
Except it's Dick Clark.
It's Dick Clark. It's American Music Awards. But also, Adam Lambert made a crucial mistake. And I love Adam, and he's an amazing artist. But he made a huge mistake. Adam Lambert saw himself as a Lady Gaga or a Madonna, this on the edge, super fucking cutting edge, getting shit done. And he wasn't. He was not that at all. His audience was a bunch of families from the Midwest that would sit down on Monday night or whenever Idol was on, I can't remember now, and they'd get a bowl of popcorn, and Mom, Dad, and Susie and Tommy would sit down and watch American Idol. And they thought, ooh, that Adam Lambert, he's a little weird, but boy, he can sing. He didn't realize, he did not know who his crowd was. Quite honestly, I don't know why, and he'd probably hate me for saying this, but we used to hear it all the time. A lot of the gay community didn't like Adam during that time. I don't know why, I don't know what it was. So he didn't really have their support. And so when he made out with Tommy, the bass player, who was a great guitar player, I asked him to play bass in that band because he looked so cool. I remember sitting down with Sterling McElwain, one of the managers and the head of Sony Records, and we were there, and the Sony record guy looked at his phone right after that happened and says, well, we're fucked. And he got up and walked out, and I thought, oh, what's going to happen? So that night, we all took a red eye to New York. By the time we landed in New York City, every one of Adam's performances were canceled. We got kicked off of all the morning shows. We got kicked off because you didn't realize, just like how Bernard Fowler was a black singer singing rock, and we didn't realize that was that big of a deal. What he did freaked people out. You wouldn't think it would. In today's world, everybody accepts gay people. Who cares, right? But no, it really did. So we lost all of our shows. Adam had to then turn not Adam had to then we got a quick shot on Letterman. We showed him on Letterman on set, and before we taped or before we did the show, one of the first times as an MD, I communicated with Adam really well, but I always, I treated him with a lot of respect as he should be treated. He treated me with a lot of respect, but I never really had to preach to Adam. Like I used to have to preach to Taylor Hawkins, the drummer. I used to have to preach to him like, keep your eye on me, you're speeding up, or, don't play your crash cymbal over the verse, go back to the hi-hat, whatever. With Adam, I didn't have to do those things. He had these natural instincts as a singer. It's just fantastic. So I said to Adam, I go, just tonight, Adam, no bullshit. Just don't do anything. I go, stand here and just sing the song. This is what got you here. Just use that. And to my surprise, he did. And he slowly started to build it back. But we only ended up, let me see, I got right there. Hold on, let me see if you can see it. See that one on the bottom? That's an Adam Lambert gold album. It should have been like 5 times platinum. He was going to ship 1 million. We're going to ship over platinum in the first week. We barely made it to over a gold record, which is 500,000 units. Everyone lost a shitload of money because they had spent 500 grand on his wardrobe. Everyone was so sure he was going to be the biggest star in the world. So Adam, once he got in Queen, I mean, I'm sure he's rich as shit now, but if he didn't get in Queen, you wouldn't be talking about him right now. Not, maybe you would be, but most likely not, because his career as a solo artist struggled from that point on, and he had some, he was getting promoted pretty good in Europe. I'd be in Europe on tour over the years, and there's a new Adam song, but it wasn't like he was the most talked about person in the planet before that, when all that happened. So.
Interesting. What about Chris Daughtry? Tell us about working with him, and he's made it too. He's kind of the real deal.
Daughtry was a real artist. Daughtry also, remember Daughtry got 4th place. He didn't even get 2nd or 3rd place, right? He got 4th, and it was a blessing because we did not have anybody up our ass looking at every detail of what we were doing with Chris Daughtry. Sterling McElwain, his manager, is a genius, and he had planned out everything and picking songs and picking mixes and we kind of we blindsided everybody. I remember Katherine McPhee was her name. She got 2nd, I think, that year. If I remember. Rolling Stone, she wanted to be on the cover of Rolling Stone. And they said, we'll do it if you and Daughtry do it together. So they called Sterling. Sterling, asked Chris, you want to be on the cover of Rolling Stone? And Chris was like, my dream was that one day I'm going to be on the cover of Rolling Stone, but I want to be on it for my music, for me. And so Chris said no. He didn't do the cover with her. And Katherine McPhee called up and she was like, you guys are idiots. You guys are so stupid. I can't believe you're blowing it. Come out. And Chris went on and sold 5-6 million records. So Chris made the right move. Chris had a real vision as an artist. He was a real artist. Not that Katherine McPhee was not a real artist, but she was, she was a great singer. Oh my God, what a voice. But, later on, she's an actor. I'm a singer. I can tap dance. I can stand on my head. There was a ton of those kind of people that are super talented. But, when you're a rock and roll artist, man, every God needs a devil to stay in business. And just the ones that are too perfect, that doesn't work.
What's the challenge transitioning these guys from singing cover songs as contestants to coming up with their own music and singing and doing their own stuff? And most, I assume, can't do it, right?
No, that's not true. Because come on, the first time I ever heard Van Halen, they were doing "You Really Got Me," but Van Halen they were real. David Lee Roth was real. He wasn't great.
Excellent point.
Not a great singer. Could never make it on American Idol. And so we're missing the point. We're missing the point. Mick Jagger would never make it on American Idol. Never. He's the greatest singer, the greatest front man that ever lived. Rod Stewart probably could have made it on American Idol, but who knows? So, when I played with Rod Stewart and he used to sing and I'd be playing a guitar, acoustic guitar, whenever he'd be right here next to me singing, I would just be like, going, like, oh my God, my body's, I'm going to die. When you hear that kind of magic, it's just, there's no words that can say, you know, what it's like. And Daughtry had that. Daughtry's just like, you know, I don't know. It was just real. Daughtry was real. David Cook could have been real. Except David Cook, I always felt like he felt guilty for his success because for years, guys used to keep him down. I remember the guy in the Nixons they treated him like crap and he was serving coffee in the guy's studio. And I go, you got that guy serving coffee with that crappy singer there when you could have that guy singing? I go, you guys need to figure your shit out. You know, that's another thing. These gatekeepers are just like, that shit bullshit too. So I don't know. So David Cook, I always felt like, because when he would sing, I mean, he was every bit as good as Chris Cornell. It was just mind blowing. As a matter of fact, his first single was written by Chris Cornell. You know,
How did you get to American Idol? And aside from the fact that it's a well-paying job, like why did you take it? Did you have any concern about, you know, as a music purist that, you know, what are people going to say to it? You know, like does any of that come into this whole new front that like it's a reality show? It's not what you did, like busting your ass and working your way up.
Well, early in Idol, I hated the show. I never would watch it. I hate stuff like that. I don't like stuff like that. I just don't care. You know, I just don't give a shit. And but around 2000, maybe it was right after I did Mick Jagger, or it was around the time. It was right after I did Jagger, I think, or maybe it was a little bit later when we opened for the Stones. I can't remember, but I you started to realize in the 2000s that with NAFTA and everything, the writing was on the wall. The record companies were having big problems and things weren't going to be the same. Getting a record deal was really hard. I had lost my recording contract in America. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had a development deal at Virgin Records where I could develop an acts and write their songs and try to get them signed, you know, said, give me money to do that. And I remember working with Chris Cornell's brother, Peter Cornell, who was incredible, with Tony Berg at Virgin, you know, and that's why I did Mick Jagger when he was at Virgin. And, you know, maybe I got a call, I was going to do Bowie, you know, stuff like that. And trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And during that time, I got a phone call from a manager named John Greenberg, who was then working with Nickelback, not Nickelbag, but Nickelback. And he said, Stevie, you surf. And it was a well-known fact. I grew up on the beach in San Diego and Oceanside in Carlsbad, California. I owned a house in California, in Carlsbad on the water, and I surfed everywhere. And I would land in Costa Rica, and I was surfing all over the world. And they go, we got a club of guys that surf. And it was the manager, you know, the head of A&R, Paul Pontius at Island, and, you know, the lawyer for the White Stripes, and John Marks, the head of music at William Morris, and, you know, Sterling McElwain, who managed Hanson, and, you know, it was all managers, lawyers, A&R executives, and agents, no musicians. But I was the only musician they invited to be in this like club, right? And we all had money, so we would fly. Like we're all flying to Cabo, we'd go surf and go out at night and drink tequila and do our thing. And we'd go to Costa Rica, and then we'd all fly to Hawaii. Went to Hawaii, you know, we'd surf in Hawaii. I remember taking some of the guys out at Pipeline. I was a good surfer then. I was surfing that Ukai next to Pipeline, and it was pretty big. And I told the guys, don't come out. I was out there catching, you know, double overhead and pretty big waves. And next thing you know, the couple of guys paddled out. And I'm like, you're gonna die out here. But you know, we were doing stuff like that. And we would call each other for work because we were in our own little clique. It's our own little clique of dudes. And so one day, Sterling McElwain calls me and goes, you know, Simon Fuller just called me from 19. And they want to know if I want to come over and work at 19. 19 Entertainment owned American Idol. And he goes, if I want to come over and manage this new kid there that's on the show right now called Daughtry. And I was already, you know, music director for a lot of big bands, Jagger and Terence Trent and Sass Jordan, these different people. I was, you know, Lamia for Clive Davis from Soul to Soul. And he goes, if I take the job, will you come over and work there with me? And I said, yeah, because by 2006 and 2005, I knew that the writing was on the wall, that the regular record business was going, and I needed to do something to get back in the game. And Idol was the biggest thing in the world at the time, just the biggest. So I said yes. Sterling went and took the job. I went and met Chris Daughtry. I started working at 19 as a consultant and a music director at Idol, and that's how it happened. And once once Daughtry came out, we hit 5-6 million records. It was like, I was getting called by everybody. Hey, Stevie, can you come listen to this? Stevie, So it was like, once you're in, and the cool thing was all of a sudden I was able to talk to Clive Davis again, and talk to Ashley, the head of Sony, would, see me in a bar and we'd talk, because then when you every 4 years in the music business, you would have to do something giant to stay in the game. And therefore, the people still take your call, or you get invited to the certain events, or when you see them, they acknowledge you. I
It's
used
all
to
about
find about
relevance.
yeah, you had to stay relevant. Every 4 years, you had to do something to stay in the game. And so Idol put me right back in the game at the highest level. I mean, for the 4 years I was there, it was the highest rated TV show, I think, in the world.
Wow, it's just a different kind of experience. And it's still, like I said, it's amazing how strong these shows still are, and they've produced so few stars / celebrities. But like you say, it's an in the moment thing. It's like right now, right here, right now. What's that?
It's about the show. It's about the show, not the singers. The singers are just the pawns.
Fascinating.
Unfortunately.
Okay, so as I said at the start, the magazine comes from a Todd Rundgren song called, an Utopia song called Rock Love from a 1979 album. Todd Rundgren produced a couple of Tubes albums. The second time he produced one called Love Bomb. Your involvement with the Tubes came after that, so tell us about the Tubes and meeting Todd, and also want to hear about some of the guys in the band, because we love Prairie, who's also in Todd's band all these years, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so like I said early on, I was a producer before I was an artist. And in '87, when I was a staff producer for David Kirschenbaum, Jamie Cohen from Columbia Records called me, who was a huge supporter of mine my whole career. It's amazing. That's how I ended up with Bootsy Collins, and Was Not Was because of Jamie Cohen, which I had some big hits with working with Was Not Was. We had really a lot of success with Don Was in '87. The '87 was the turning year of my life where I went from super starving broke to I got some money now, not loaded, but that didn't happen until Rod Stewart and my recording contracts and all that. So, but I was like, all of a sudden I was rocking, I was making money and I was making records that everyone knew and working on films. And so Jamie Cohen asked me, he goes, I want to sign the Tubes, but they needed young, fresh blood. Will you go up and work with them on four songs or something? Let's see how it works out, and go cut some tracks and produce them. I'm like, of course. I mean, Prairie Prince was one of the greatest drummers that ever lived, and I love the Tubes. I remember seeing the Tubes when I was in San Diego as a kid. They were mind blowing, and White Punks on Dope is still one of my favorite songs. And so I'm like, yeah. So I fly up to San Francisco. I start to go through all the songs they have and working with them. And to my surprise, Fee Waybill quit the band. And I was just like, shit. Because, I mean, even then I knew you could be the baddest ass drummer and the baddest ass guitar player in the world and the baddest ass everything, but you got to have the right singer. The singer is really so important. And so Bill Spooner started singing, and we were trying to make it work. But I remember one day I was sitting in the studio and Todd Rundgren walked in, and I'd never met him, of course. And I was like, yeah, I was friggin', I was still, I don't know, I wasn't that many years out of high school. And I still to this day, I'll go, oh my God, there's, blah, blah, blah. Oh my God, that's so awesome. And Todd Rundgren was like, God, it's Todd Rundgren, it's like, he walks in the studio and he gets introduced to, everyone says, hey, and he says, hey, and I can tell he's kind of grumpy. And he looks at me and I get introduced to him, hey, and he goes, oh, hey, what's up? Like, yeah, what's up? Like, kind of cold to me. And I was already kind of intimidated, but I used to not let myself get too intimidated. I'm a fighter. I'd say, fuck you, I'll fucking kick your fucking ass right here. I'm that guy. And even if I get my ass kicked, I'll fucking rip the guy's ear off his fucking head or something. You're going to remember fighting me. And so I was starting to get kind of thinking like, fuck, Todd Rundgren's fucking vibing me out. And he's sitting right behind me. Like picture if that was his head. And I know he's behind me, and I can feel heat. I can feel his
and
vibe.
He's a big guy and a big presence, yeah.
And he's got this energy, like Sting. One time I remember on the side of the stage at a concert, I felt uncomfortable. I'm feeling all uncomfortable, I can't figure out why. And I look and Sting's standing next to me. He's got this magnetic energy that's rubbing me like, ooh, I don't know. It's creeping me out. And I didn't know it. And I looked and, oh my God, Sting's standing next to me. I could feel his energy. I could feel Todd. It was like burning the back of my neck. And I'm a little kid and I'm intimidated and I'm nervous and I'm kind of bummed out because I really want, Todd Rundgren. I want him to like me. And he got up after a while. He split. I go, all right. I go, hey, take it easy, man. He's like, blah, blah, blah. And he splits. I'm thinking to myself, what a fucking asshole. And I call Columbia. I go, yeah, that guy was such a dick to me. It was such an asshole. And I carried it with me because I carry grudges. I'm that guy. I'm a Scorpio. I carry grudges. I don't know how many years later, and I already had big records. I was already in Rod's band. I'd already was doing lots of big shit. And I pop into the Greek theater because back in Hollywood, certain guys could just roll up every night. Oh, well, the Greek, I'll come backstage and I'll say hi and I'll do the blah, blah. You don't have to have tickets. You just have to make a phone call, So I pop into the Greek. I walk backstage and everyone on the side of the stage is watching Ringo's band play, Ringo Starr. I don't know if you know. I didn't want to just say Ringo without his last name because I know that's everyone knows it's Ringo Starr. I'm joking. So Ringo's playing. And I see Don West. So Don comes up and gives me a big hug. And I look at the corner of my eye and he's standing with Todd Rundgren. And Don goes, Stevie, have you ever met Todd Rundgren? Todd, this is Stevie Salas. And he goes, hey, Stevie, how are you, man? Good to meet you. Shakes my hand. It's so nice to meet you, he said. And I have to do it. I'm just like sitting there
You just couldn't hold it in, could you?
And I'm like, I go, can I tell you something, Todd? And he goes, what? I go, we've actually met before. He goes, oh yeah, really, what? I go, well, a long time ago, and I start to tell the story, and he goes like this. He's like, stop. I'm so sorry. He goes, I remember that, and I remember I was feeling useless. I hired some unknown kid. I had just produced the Tubes. Nobody wanted me, and you're this kid, this whiz kid, they said. And you're in there and you're young and I'm feeling old and I'm feeling washed up. And I remember I was just so angry. And he goes, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. And I was just like, come here. And we just hugged. And I love you, Todd Rundgren, because he was man enough to say that and didn't, he was a grown man and he apologized and I forgive him. And if I saw Todd Rundgren today, I would fucking, give him every dollar I had in my pocket or whatever, buy him a soda, whatever he wanted, because he was man enough to apologize. And I get it too, because sometimes I see people that I think are bullshit and they're doing well. And you're kind of like, fuck that fucking guy. I'm way better than that guy. Why did they hire him to come there? I kill that guy. So you get like that sometimes in our business.
Well, and like you said, you're constantly trying to stay relevant. And one of the ways the big machine sort of makes you feel irrelevant is by bringing in younger people and pushing you off to the side.
Well, like last year, I got up and I got asked to sit in with Buddy Guy, which was cool at the ACL at the Austin City Limits. And it was cool. And I met Gary Clark Jr., who was super cool, and he knew who I was. Man, you did that. I like that shit you did with Mick Jagger, he says. So his manager, Scooter, is a friend of mine, and I've known him for a long time. And Scooter puts on the Clapton Crossroads thing, right? And Scooter's like, why don't you come down? How come you never, you never play? And I go, because no one ever asks me. And he goes, well, why don't you just show up? And I go, you know what? I eat up half those, 3/4 of those guitar players playing on that gig. Not only that, I go, I've sold, I don't know, 3 million solo albums, plus I've sold more solo albums than probably 20 of them put together, because everyone sells their 10,000 records here, the blues guys or whatever. I go, I just feel like I should not have to be coming up there and asking like someone can do me a favor, and I shouldn't be that way. But Scooter goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't really realize, Stevie. It's like, so sometimes I turn into a bitch like that too, you know what I mean? So I can't blame Todd Rundgren.
It's just a great story. I love that. Okay, let's spend a few minutes talking about one of the most important people in music who is not a musician. and that is the great late Bill Graham, who was one of your managers, owned the two greatest venues in the country. I mean, I went to hundreds and hundreds. We were based in San Francisco. I went to hundreds of shows at the Fillmore. It is a beautiful relic of a dump, and you wouldn't want it changed for anything. But tell us about the great Bill Graham, who, a lot of what we have in rock and roll today is because of him.
Well, when I was getting kind of hot in '87, again, '87 was a magic year for me. I had met Morty Wiggins from Bill Graham. And at that time, I was flying back and forth to London a lot. Was Not Was had hits. Zio, the Fairlight Whiz guy who introduced me, how I met George Clinton, really, was flying me back and forth. That's when I met Terence Trent D'Arby before the Hardline album ever came out. They wanted me to be his guitar player. I didn't want to do it because it didn't have enough rock guitar, and I wanted to rock. But I got to know Terence then, right before he blew up and took over the planet. And managers were trying to sign me. I remember this manager managed Thomas Dolby, wanted to manage me. He was super cool, and I wanted to do that. He was working with a friend of mine, Dave Kaplan, who manages Brian Setzer. So I like them a lot. I met with many managers that all wanted to manage me, but I had met Morty Wiggins from Bill Graham, and I was starstruck by Bill Graham. I really was. And
how could you not be?
Yeah, and Morty Wiggins was one of the smartest guys I'd ever met in my life. And I would go play, like I was playing little clubs like FM Station, and Morty would fly down from San Francisco, and he would have my set list, and he would make really detailed notes about each song, and and helping me, like, go to the chorus sooner or whatever. He was really, really hands-on. It wasn't just like, Stevie, how much money can we make real quick? What are we going to do? So I picked Bill Graham, and I've really only been intimidated where I got kind of geeked out, kind of geeky, a couple times in my life. And one of them was with George Harrison, where I just got all, I don't know what happened. I just like, he sat at my table, and I was all, and he mellowed me right out. George Harrison, like, grabbed my hand, he was staring me in the eye. He was shaking my hand, doing all this kind of crazy stuff while he was staring at me. And I just went, ah. And I sat down with him, and he bought me a margarita, and we had drinks and talked, and it was great. But him and Bill Graham, when I'd get around Bill Graham, I'd get all geeky too, because Bill Graham would sit down and tell these stories, and he was hilarious. Like, he was an incredible actor. And Bill Graham everything that he talked about was just like amazing, And I remember Rod Stewart, I was in Rod's band, and Rod's like, your manager's a criminal. He steals from all the bands. And I'd be like, I don't know if I believe that. I don't care. Bill Graham is like, I just think he's freaking amazing. And I thought Rod Stewart was amazing. I still think Rod's amazing. I love Rod. Rod put me on. I wouldn't know you probably if it wasn't for Rod. Rod taking me when I was a nobody and put me in that giant band. So, Bill Graham was amazing to me. And I remember I was in Tokyo. I had to fly to Tokyo to play at the Budokan in 1991. And judge a contest, me and Nathan East and Mark Slaughter, and there was something going on at the Budokan, and I had to fly over to play at the Budokan and do this thing. And I remember watching CNN, and the helicopter, Bill Graham crashed, and he was dead. And it was like probably 4 a.m, 3 a.m, San Francisco time. But it was on in Tokyo, because it was the day before or whatever, the next day already or whatever. And I was devastated. I had a hole in my soul. I was so down. And I remember I had to give a speech at this thing that evening in Tokyo. And I was just really down. I was just crushed. It wasn't like Bill Graham and me were like me and Morty Wiggins would talk every day, but and Mick Brigden and Kevin and the guys in the office would talk every day, but it just crushed me when Bill died. And I think about it a lot.
It's another one of the days the music died. Did you ever talk to him of, this racism stuff we were talking about earlier? Did you ever talk to him about any of that? Because, he was Jewish with him from an immigrant family that had ties to the Holocaust and everything. He would have understood that, I would imagine.
He would have understood it because his team understood it, because it was Morty Wiggins that managed Ivan Neville, that I realized was the guy who didn't put Ivan's picture on the album. So They all knew. They all knew it was up. They were smart, man. That was a smart group of people. Morty Wiggins is still amazing. I mean, he ended up running A&M Records for a long time. And I talked to Morty just the other day, actually, because me and Ivan Neville were hanging out in Austin, Texas, and we sent him a picture. But when I read Bill's book, and I remember what struck me was that he would even get issues with his own people, because I remember he wanted to have a concert in a synagogue or something like that. I might be wrong, so anybody from Israel or any Jewish people, please don't get mad at me. I found out in my ancestry.com, I don't know, 60% Native American, but I'm about 13% Jewish too in my ancestry.com, which, there you go. But so he went to the rabbi, and the rabbi started reprimanding him. You don't know what we've gone through, and you don't know the plight of the Jewish people, and you're in here, you just want to have music. And he goes, wait a minute. Bill wasn't, you don't mess with Bill. He could get pretty hardcore. And he told him how he escaped the Holocaust. He escaped on his own without his family. He snuck into France and got out of France. And I felt like such an asshole. And so even he had to deal with some shit from his own people.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, from his own people. I mean, everybody deals with some shit here and there.
So was he aware of his place in the history of all of this, or was he just doing it and living it? And like, did he know that that there was going to be this huge, without him there's no Dead and Janis, and like he's responsible for so much of this.
Probably Carlos too. He was the guy who put Carlos on the billet. He wouldn't do Woodstock unless they let Carlos play. I'm sure he knew, but that was nothing I ever talked to him about. But I'm sure he knew. I do know this. When the Stones decided to not work with him as their promoter, I believe it was the Steel Wheels tour. I think they went to Michael Cole, the really rich guy from Canada. It was super cool too, by the way. He just offered him so much money, and he lost the Stones. I remember Mick Brigden and people saying he was pretty hurt by that. He was pretty crushed by that, because the Stones was one of his shining diamonds. He was the guy who promoted the Stones, And again, everything seems to come back to the Stones, everything.
Okay, before we move on and talk about your film, tell me.
Hold on, hey, Jordan, just so you know,
the
importance of Mick Jagger calling me. Ivan Neville saying, to people like, we got a small little group, like Goodfellows, he's a friend of mine, like the mobsters will say, there's a small group of us guys that are attached to the Stones in some way. That guy's a friend of mine. The Stones is an important key to everything rock and roll, I think. Maybe now young people don't get it, but it was everything if you could get into that, was the holy grail.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and they don't get it. So, okay.
And their magazine cover, you said, what do the Stones know that we don't?
Right.
I thought that was cool.
Absolutely, because I knew no other way to try and explain it in one sentence at the time. Okay, so before we talk about your film, a few more minutes on one of my favorite artists of all time, still to this day, as you said, the artist Sananda Maitreya, the artist formerly known as Terence Trent D'Arby. I mean, Vibrator still to this day is his third album is one of my favorite albums of all time. On the show here, a couple of times when we've done lists, I've pulled that album as one of the things on my list for the particular categories we were doing. So tell us about Terence Sananda and how you came into all that, and just what I think, even though he had that huge success, he's really an underappreciated performer.
Hold on, let me show you something real quick that I just actually found a couple of days ago.
Go for it, please.
So I found this in a box in my music room. And
we got it, yeah.
What is this? Do you have this one? It's like this whole thing, right?
No, but that's a promo or something, right? What is that, for Vibrator or Fisher nor Flesh?
Limited edition double CD pack. Do You Love Me Like You Say, maxi single with a bunch of tracks on it. And there's a track on this. I'm on a bunch of them. I'm on Read My Lips, which was on Vibrator, but this was for Symphony or Damn. We recorded that for Symphony or Damn. So, but we did a track that's called not Read My Lips. Read My Lips is on vibrator, but we did that here in this one, and it was on the single. It's called Perfumed Pavilion. Okay, so one of the greatest things I think I've ever played on, and most people have never heard it, and you guys should go find it. A song by then Terence Trent D'Arby. Now he probably is out under Sananda Maitreya, and it's a song called Perfume Pavilion. And we went into one-on-one studios, and we played live in the studio with him singing live. And Kurt Buscara was on drums. I think he was in Elton John's band at that time, or maybe Morris Day's band. I don't forget. And this famous jazz bass player, forget his name, was playing jazz guy. And me on guitar, and and Ben Montench from Tom Petty and Heartbreakers was playing keyboards. And we cut this song, Perfume Pavilion, and I cut this guitar that's on that track live, and the solos live, and TTD's singing live, Sananda's singing it live. And this is Perfume Pavilion off this, if you can find it, is like my favorite thing. One of the favorite things I've ever recorded in my life. So I knew him before he came out and was famous. I watched him become gigantic. I would pop out and see him at places. We stayed in touch. But the reason that he didn't stay a household name was he was always interested in pushing the envelope. You know, he didn't want to play the game. So
that's like Todd. Yep.
If you're a musician, this may sound weird. I remember being in a studio with him one time, and we have this song going, we're doing something that's just grooving, and he goes, okay, and he would be holding a guitar, and he would be like, I don't know, hold on, he would grab the guitar, and he'd be just listening to what we were playing, and he would take his hands, and I'd see him going like this, and then you hear he'd go, and I'd be like, what are you doing? And he goes, the engineer, hey, do me a favor. On that bar right there, just punch the guitar in. And it'd be like, and I'm like, what are you doing? But he was like experimenting with all these sounds and weird chords. And sometimes he'd hit it and you'd be like, well, that's a fucking weird bridge. And sometimes it was like that. It was like, what the fuck is he doing? So he experimented and pushed to try to break new ground like a true artist. And that's, real artists don't always make it in the music business, So there you go.
And how about that voice of his? There's just something about it that just so beautifully resonates.
Do you know who Richie Kotzen is?
Yep.
So Richie Kotzen's one of my best friends, and he was my neighbor in my house in the Hollywood Hills. And I was one of his only friends for the longest time because Richie really shy. He's not so shy now, but he's really shy when we were young. And he was a huge fan of then Terence Trent D'Arby. And so I was Terence's music director, and we were getting ready to go on tour with Duran. And so Terence, he would come to my house a lot. Everyone used to hang out at my house in the Hollywood Hills. I had this cool house, and everyone used to people had keys and had a rehearsal room in the back where Taylor Hawkins and everybody learned how to play back in that bombshell of mine. And I call Richie Kotz. I go, you want to meet him? I go, he's here right now. I go, knock at my back door like you need to borrow like a screwdriver or something, and then I'll introduce you to him. So he goes, okay. So he comes down the driveway, my back driveway, comes to my back door, bing bong, and I pretend I don't know what's going on. And keep in mind, Sananda's super shy back then too, really quiet. I'm not on stage. He was, but on person, he was like very quiet. So that he's sitting on one edge of my couch, this edge. Okay. And I walk Richie in the back door. And I go, Richie, did you ever meet, TTD, Terence back then? I hate to call him Terence now because his real name is Sananda, but did you ever meet him? He goes, no, but I've always wanted to meet you. And Terence knew who Richie was. And he goes, he gets up and he goes, they both soft-spoken. And Richie's like, I just love your voice. And it's so nice to meet you. And Terence like, thank you. Really nice to meet you too. And one sits on one edge of my couch, and one sits on the other edge of my couch, far apart as possibly can be. And the TV's not on, and they're both sitting there like this, looking straight ahead. So I sneak out into my room and I'm looking in my hallway and I'm peeking in, and all I see is them both sitting like this. And it's dead silence. I mean, uncomfortable silence. Then Richie kind of goes, um, I think you're the most amazing singer. God, I really loved your voice. I've always loved your voice and blah, blah. And he goes, and then Terence goes, oh, thank you. You're an amazing guitar player and blah, 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 blah. And then he goes, and they're both dead silent. It is dead uncomfortable. And then I come out and I start fucking with them both and, whatever. We go on our way. But when I introduced them, so now though, 100 years later, that was 1993. Richie was just hanging out with him in Italy. I saw a few weeks ago when he was there on the Smith Kotzen tour. Terence and Richie are great friends now. And I just had lunch with him in Italy. I don't know, last year I was in Milan shopping or something, and I went and we hung out. And so I actually I have a text from him on my phone right now. He wrote me this morning. So he's living in Italy, having a great time, married, happy with kids, and making music. And hopefully someday him and I will work together again, because when him and I work together, it's really special. There's something really great about it.
Absolutely, I certainly hope so. And he's still performing, and he's got this band, the Something Pharaohs. That I mean, their stuff is great. Okay, let's talk about your film. So a handful of years ago, you embarked on this documentary project that ended up becoming an award-winning documentary project, and it's something I really respect and understand, because I've just been doing the same thing myself the last 4 or 5 years with the family documentary project that I have out at film festivals now. But tell us about the film Rumble, which people can go see on Amazon Prime at the moment, and how it came about and the genesis of it and what you were trying to achieve. And then I want to hear about getting all these people to participate, not just Native American rock stars.
Well, I think it was 2003 or 2004. I was pretty much trying to retire. I was sick of the music business, and of course, that didn't happen because I lost a fortune in the 2000 stock market crash, and I kind of needed to start working again. And I was going up to Canada to open for the Rolling Stones with Sass Jordan. She asked me to come up and get her band in shape and play and do this big show with her. It was a huge show; 500,000 people were there. And when I got up there, a writer called Brian Wright McLeod, who's a Native American, was writing a book about everything ever recorded by a Native American going back to 1908, wax cylinders. And of course, not to sound like an asshole, but I was maybe one of the most successful Native American recording artists of selling, several million records and playing with the biggest people in the history of rock. And so I was up in that game, and he wanted me in his book. And I wanted to be in his book because I take my indigenous heritage very serious. And while sitting with him, he told me the story of Jesse Ed Davis, who I totally knew who he was, because when I was in 6th grade, I remember I had Rod Stewart Atlantic Crossing, and I used to read about the guitar player on that record, Jesse Ed Davis. I used to read his name on all kinds of records. He told me all about Link Wray. Of course, I knew who Link Wray was. I loved the song Rumble. I remember not that long ago, it was in Pulp Fiction. And I go, oh, there's Rumble. What I didn't know was that both Jesse Ed Davis and Link Wray were Native Americans like me. I had no idea Robbie Robertson was a Native American. I had no idea. And I remember being an idiot, walking on stage. The first time I played at Madison Square Gardens, I think I did a 3-night run or a 2-night run at Madison Square Gardens in 1988. And I walked on the stage at Soundcheck, and I kissed the stage. I go, maybe I'm the first Native American to ever play Madison Square Gardens. I had no idea that I wasn't even close, not even close. I'm such an idiot I am. So I realized in 2004, or whatever that was, that if I don't know this information, that means most indigenous people don't know this information either. And I go, maybe I should find a way to get this information out so Native people can realize that the impossible is not impossible and that it can be done. And there's some role models out here that you could get into that aren't just from 150 years ago, So I went around, I thought I was going to make a book, or make a coffee table book or whatever. And then I met a Mohawk guy named Tim Johnson, who was the boss at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. and New York. He was the sort of the real in command guy at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. He met me. He liked the speech I gave at this opening of a recording studio on Six Nations, and he wanted to talk to me because I said I'd spent my career, I said I'd watched Native people spend all day trying to get one Native into the mainstream so they can say, there's a guy's an Indian up there. And I said, you guys got it wrong. I go, everywhere I go in the world, people love our indigenous heritage. I go, we got to bring the mainstream to Indian country. And Tim Johnson really liked that. So he goes, I'm, running this museum and, Smithsonian. Will you come down and check it out? So I flew in, I checked it out, and he goes, let's go to New York. And we jumped on a train that afternoon to go to New York to show me that Smithsonian as well. And on that train ride, I told him the story about these musicians and how I wanted to create a film or create something with these musicians. And there was more of them, And he just was, oh my God, we should do an exhibit at the Smithsonian. And there I go, 1 minute, I'm got a D- in history class in high school at El Camino High School in Oceanside, California. And now I'm working at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian with scholars, walking around in my surf trunks in DC. And I made an exhibit that became the most popular exhibit in they've ever had. And to everyone's surprise, I did it with them, with their genius brains that were there, amazing people. So then we did it in New York, and it was 4 times bigger. When that was done, I decided I needed to make a movie about it. And I had already been producing television now in Canada since 2006. I had a TV show up there that I starred in and produced and wrote, and with all my rock star friends were in it. It's called Arbor Live. Like, you can Google, put Stevie Salas, Tommy Lee, Arbor Live, and watch some of the clips. It's like ridiculous. It was a ridiculous comedy show, reality comedy show kind of thing. And so I met some people, and I went about making the movie Rumble, The Indians That Rocked the World. And I just thought it was going to be a small film for PBS that would show natives that there are some amazing people they could look into that would inspire them. I didn't know it was going to change written history. I didn't know it was going to win Sundance. I didn't even go to Sundance. I went to Japan to play some concerts and make some money because you can lose a lot of money fast making documentaries. So I went to Japan to do a bunch of sold out concerts, and while I was there, we won Sundance, and I had to go on a satellite, and when I got back, all hell broke loose, and I went to Boulder, and we won that festival, and I went to Bud, and we just kept winning. And for 2 or 3 years, I was traveling around the world, speaking at Notre Dame, and Rumble just was this thing that just had its own wheels, and it exploded. It was on Netflix forever. That thing right there in the gold, that was my Emmy nomination. I got nominated for an Emmy Award. I mean, I got lucky. I just hit, I had a smart team of people, and we hit it out of the park.
So how does the response to it hit you, and it obviously people felt it viscerally because, like I said, you have some of the most important people in music are in the film, and so when you reflect on it now, some years later, what do you think?
Some people were giving me shit for including so many superstar rock stars in the film. See, what they didn't understand was the movie was about a small group of indigenous people who influenced most of what we know in popular music history. Okay? Now, people go, well, you should have put this guy in it. You should put that guy. And I go, no. Those guys didn't influence Aerosmith and Led Zeppelin. They didn't influence Jeff Beck. It's about a small group that influenced everyone we know. They're like unsung heroes. And if you're going to say Jesse Ed Davis was one of the greatest guitar players that ever lived, if I say that, people might go like, I don't know about that. But if Eric Clapton says it, they're going to go, Clapton says this is his favorite guitar player. We need to check that guy out. So I knew I needed to have the most famous musicians in the world. Steven Tyler said to me one day, because I love playing with Steven Tyler. I love hanging out with him too. So Steven says to me one day, you know what? He goes, when me and Joe Perry were putting Aerosmith together, all we listened to was Jesse Ed Davis and Taj Mahal, and that's the sound we wanted for our band. And I'm thinking, God, Jesse Ed Davis influenced the biggest rock band in American history, Aerosmith, right? And I go, people got to know that. But I needed Steven Tyler to say it. Otherwise, it's just hearsay, right? So I had to get all those people in the film. Jeff Beck told me, he goes, me and Jimmy Page would be in my mom's house when I was in high school. We'd have tennis rackets, and we were jumping up and down in my bedroom playing air guitar to Link Wray. And I'm like, someone has to know this. This is crazy. And luckily for me, I knew most of those rock stars. I'd worked with them or knew them or they knew me. And I was able to call Pete Townsend up and have him send me emails telling me all about why he was into Link Wray and all kinds of stuff. So I was just, the gods were in the right place and I was the right guy to get that done, with where I was in the world. And I'm grateful that I did it. And it was a gift from the gods. And I just got lucky. I got lucky.
So you're an accomplished musician and producer. So what is it about those three notes in Rumble that resonates with everybody? That is pretty much the basis, from which a lot of or all rock and roll is built around.
See, I don't think it's the notes. I think it's the intention. You feel, they outlawed that song at radio because they were afraid it was going to start gang violence. It was going to create an uprising and gang violence. But there's no lyrics. There's no lyrics like saying like Rage Against the Machine, like kill, kill, kill. There's nothing. It's just music. There's no lyrics. And somehow that you feel this aggression and this 500 years of pain and everything else that goes with it, and there's no explaining it. It's just another one of those things. I feel like the gods or aliens or whatever set these things all up to where you can find these little game pieces and plug them in, and this changes the journey constantly, right? And Link Wray hit that, and it took a while. Would we know Pete Townsend if it wasn't for that? Maybe not. Would we know Jeff Beck if it wasn't for that? Maybe not. Jimmy Page? Maybe not. So everything happens for a reason. You just got to search it out and find it and discover it. And there you go.
No, and we can only thank you for bringing it to us, because it's this day and age and the way media moves over the internet and everything nowadays that allows the story to get out and for people to hear it beyond the film. So all right, before I let you go and get your lunch, let me throw a few names out at you that we haven't talked much about, and then just tell me a little bit of remembrances or whatnot that you have. Let's start with the masters themselves, George Clinton and Bootsy Collins.
Ground breakers, rule breakers, positive, always the positive. George Clinton is just like, okay, so I'm homeless, sleeping on the couch at Baby O Studio. Got all my clothes in black garbage bags. Worst summer of my life, August, September 1985. I go up to musicians, like, hey, if you need a guitar player. I remember Keel was making their record. Vinnie Vincent was in there, and he was all pissed off all the time, smashing guitars. I remember Gene Simmons coming in there and hey, I play guitar. If you need a guitar player, he's like, whatever. Nobody gives a shit. And I went up to George Clinton when he came in there. And I said, I play guitar. And he was like, all he said was, okay. He said, a nice guy. Okay. And that night at 2 a.m, Gary Shider, blanking on his name. He wrote Atomic Dog. He comes and wakes me up, goes, you want to try some guitar? And I go downstairs, and it's 2 a.m. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to try some guitar, man. And there's a guitar player playing. And it's funny because I just watched this film on Netflix this week about the early days of the Red Hot Chili Peppers with Hilel Slovak, right? Well, when Hilel quit the band and went back to What Is This, they got a guitar player in the band and the Red Hot Chili Peppers named Jack Sherman. So they, Jack Sherman's in there playing guitar, from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It's 1985, and I'm like listening to what he's playing. And it was a song called Hooray for Our Team. Hooray for our team. And Jack's playing this funky, this little funky thing, like classic funk, like funkadelic. And this is a turning point in my life, and every musician should think about this. This was a turning point in my life where a light bulb went off, like another gift from the gods at that moment. Because what he was playing to me sounded amazing. And it dawned on me, why did they ask me to come down here and play that? And I thought, what he was playing, he studied Parliament Funkadelic and George Clinton and Bootsy and those records. and he was a connoisseur of what Gary Shider and what Boogie would play and what Bootsy would play on guitar. He learned that, like me sitting down learning how to play Eruption by Eddie Van Halen, right? And I thought, George doesn't want that. George is a maverick. George breaks new ground with every record. He wants something different. He doesn't want what's already been done. And so I stuck my wang bar on my piece of shit $200 Ibanez guitar, and I started doing like my Steve Stevens imitation and my Edward Van Halen. And George Clinton went, "What's going on in here? It sounds like a freight train," or some shit. I remember him saying. He came running in the room. And he stood next to me, and his hair was all, back then it was all orange and different colors and braids. And he's playing, and I'm playing, and the song was 15 minutes long. It was one song, was the whole roll of 2-inch tape, and then they'd edit it up later. So my arm was like, my veins were popping out, and my arm was killing me. And it was like, he'd yell, "Play some blues," like, "Okay, play some funk," and all in time, never stopping the tape. And at the end of that night, Jack Sherman packed up and left, and I stayed, and I got to work on the rest of the record. And that's how my career started. And it was a valuable lesson that I realized, not because I would have probably heard what Jack was playing and thought that's what will work, because that's what I know will work, because those guys had made it work for years on records when I was growing up, you know? And so I realized then that I needed to become who I am at that moment. And was a big moment. And then I went on to Bootsy after that, and I went on to Don Was, Thomas Dolby, things like that, with those being around in that clique of guys. But so those guys always were there to like Terence Trent D'Arby was, like Sananda Maitreya is, trying to break new ground, not trying to recreate what they've already done.
Nope, Todd, that's what we all love about Todd too. What about Duran? And if you have something else to add to that, go ahead.
Well, my thing is this. At that point, I had to sit down and say to myself in 1985, okay, I want to make it in music. I want to be a guitar player. I'm never going to be as good as Edward Van Halen. I love Brian Setzer. I can play a bit like that too. And I love what I'm doing with Funkadelic and funk, and I love the Ohio Players. So I said, I'm just going to start playing funk music with Marshall amps. And that's what, went on to become Color Code and my sound and my thing. That was one of my gimmick. I tried to create that and make that my space. And to this day, I listened to the Michael Hutchence album that came out in '97 that I played on, and I was doing wah wah and that dirty funk in there, just like it's like that became my shtick, so to speak.
He was another one, Mr. Charisma, Jesus.
Yeah, that's the platinum album right there. Michael Hutchence solo album came out after he died. Unfortunately, it was such a drag. He was such a bitching guy.
What a great
He
talent.
played his last gig hard. We played Nickelback, played at the Viper Room, and all these celebs were sitting in with us. Adam Duritz and Billy Gibbons, and all these people got up and just played with us that night. And the place was packed. Every rock star in the world was there. And Michael Hutchence got up and sang with us that night. And unfortunately, he died less than a week later. He went home to Australia and he died.
It's so sad. Okay, how about Duran and your odyssey, I should say, with them?
So I met them in Atlanta. Well, first of all, in '87, before I was in Rod Stewart, Andy Taylor quit Duran, made an album called Thunder with Steve Jones. And I was in line to produce Steve Jones. His manager, Anita, they were talking to me about producing Steve Jones' solo album for MCA. And then I got a call from a guy called Mark Levy, who knew me from San Diego, who moved to LA and was an agent and was always a big supporter of mine. He says, "Hey, Andy Taylor's looking for a guitar player. You should audition." So I go, "Of course, please." Andy Taylor's amazing, right? I loved Duran growing up. Andy's badass. He was a big part of their sound. So I go audition for Andy Taylor. And not to sound like a dick, but like always, whenever I audition, I could audition so good. The only time I ever had a bad audition is when I got called by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I had a shitty audition. But every other audition I come in, I would just slay. And so I slayed it, and Andy hired me. And I was going to go on tour with the opening for the Psychedelic Furs. And right before the tour started, Andy fired me, which crushed me. And I went back to Was Not Was in England and blah, blah, blah.
Fired you, why?
So what's that?
Fired you, why?
I don't know why. I think that I was too loud, or I bought red Marshall amps. I ordered 6 cabinets and 3 heads for the Psychedelic Furs tour. They were red. They were super hard to find. And when I showed up at rehearsal, he was pissed off that I had red cabinets and had them spray painted black. I was like, fuck. I think he just didn't like me. I was too confident or too cocky, which I was full of my own shit big time. Still am probably. But, it was crushed me because all my friends in San Diego were going to go see the show. First show was the LA Forum. Second show was San Diego Open Air Amphitheater. And all my friends from high school bought tickets because I was only a few years out of high school. And I wasn't there. And there was no internet, so no one knew I was going to show up, and everyone thought I was a liar. It crushed me. So 88, I'm with Rod Stewart now, and I'm in Atlanta, and Duran's playing there, but Ron Cuccurullo's playing guitar. And I go to the show, and I hang out, and I meet John Taylor. I'd met John Taylor before. I met him in the airport in 87 on my way to London. And he was always really cool. But I go to one of their after parties. I'm hanging out with Simon Le Bon. And I thought Simon Le Bon was such a dick. I didn't like him at all. I thought he was just a cocky asshole. And years later, I go on tour with Duran with TTD, with Terence. And I fell in love with Simon Le Bon. Him and I just became the best friends. And I just love Simon Le Bon to this day. And John, I was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame recently, and I went up behind him and hugging him. And, you just never know. But I just have enough fun. And then I got a call. I was in London, I don't know, 5 years ago, 4 years, 6 years ago. I don't know, something like that. I was on my way coming back from the south of France. I was in Cannes speaking with Rumble at Cannes at a festival. And I stopped in London to do some press or something just a few years ago. And Duran was in there recording. And I had just done, Justin Timberlake was in there working with him. And I had just done, maybe it was right before I did Justin Timberlake, Dead and Gone with T.I. That record sold a couple million copies. And Duran was like, Stevie would be great, because Andy had left the band again. He joined the band again and left again. And I got a call saying they were going to maybe call me, and I started to think, wow, I wonder if I would actually join Duran. So, I'm a dad now. That would mean I'd be on tour, they tour all the time, and I would be gone a lot. I just didn't know, but they didn't call me to do it. Yeah, they were talking to me about coming in and playing on the record, and it just didn't happen. But when I see them, I have nothing but love for John Taylor and Simon Le Bon. So I think they're amazing.
So I want to hear a little bit. Tell me about Warren Cuccurullo a little bit, and I'll tell you my quick 6 degrees of separation story. So when I was a teenager, my job was I was a stock boy in the fur department at Jordan Marsh in Boston. And I worked with this woman who had been a sales lady there for like 40 years by the name of Hazel Consalvi. And she had a daughter by the name of Dale Consalvi, who was a Playboy bunny in Boston and became pretty big. And then she was Playboy Bunny of the Year. And then she goes out to L.A. And then she falls in with Zappa. And then she falls in love with Terry Bozzio, and they get married. And then Terry and her and Warren and Patrick all leave Zappa and go form Missing Persons. And I just would hear the stories from her mother regaling us constantly about what was going on with Dale and Terry and everything. But tell me about Warren and anything you might know about Missing Persons, because they were like a huge thing for 5 years.
Okay, well, in 86 and 87, we all used to go dance at a place in downtown Los Angeles called Vertigo. And it was a super cool club called Vertigo. And anyone from listening to this from LA will remember if they're old enough. And I remember I was with Carla Azar. Carla was my friend, and she later became the drummer of Wendy and Lisa, and the drummer of Jack White, and the drummer of the Waterboys. She was just super great pal of mine. We'd go to Vertigo, and all kind of future rock stars and rock stars would be there. And Warren Cuccurullo, she was friends with Warren, and Warren, I had this big, perfect, Susie and the Banshees hair, giant, and Warren had and I kind of liked it because Warren had that hair on the Missing Persons album cover, right? And Warren came up to me and goes, yeah, but yours is real. I have to put plugs in mine or some shit like that. I go, really? So I didn't even think about it. So that was my first exposure with Warren, who I thought was an insane guitar player, because the Missing Persons album, to me, are the greatest albums. Those are the best albums. So, years later, Warren's now in Duran, and we're on tour together. And Warren is another one of those futuristic guys that really experiments with sounds. He had this weird computer setup and all this direct shit. Early, 1993, he's doing all this. But about every third or fourth show, he'd have to plug into my 2 Marshall half stacks and my pedal board because his shit would break, because it was too futuristic. It wouldn't work, some weird power outage, and the digital shit would flip out. But by then he cut all his hair off, and he was really into weightlifting. He was like Muscle Man. And I remember all the young girls used to call him Fonzie. But he was great. And, and that was the tour where he wrote that song, I won't cry for yesterday. There's an ordinary world. And that was the big hit on that tour we were on. And Warren, I think Warren is ridiculously amazing. I just think he's amazing. But in the early days, he used to give me shit because my hair could do what his was, but mine was real.
That's great. All right. How about the master Rod Stewart, who taught you so much as a young man?
Rod is a god to me. Rod put me in his band when I was nobody. He gave me a chance and took a big risk. And I wrote a book about it called When We Were the Boys. You can get it on Amazon. It's like, it was a bestseller for a minute. It's about that year in my life when a stupid kid got in a Rod Stewart's band with the greatest musicians in the world. The next youngest guy in the band was probably 10 or 12 years older than me, 13 years older than me. I was just like a moron, but I had this natural talent, kind of like Taylor Hawkins was when I first took him on his first world tour. He had these gifts that you couldn't teach, but he needed a lot of teaching, and I needed a lot of teaching too. Jeff Golub and Carmine Rojas and those guys really helped me, and Jimmy Roberts and Tony Brock, and then they helped me stay in the game. And my life was changed forever because of Rod Stewart. I saw him recently, and he was hugging me, and it was just so. I just love him, man. He was like, people can talk all the shit they want about Rod Stewart, but he's a god among men.
But what did you learn about producing a show and performing and perfection and all of that good stuff?
You learn a lot through osmosis if you're paying attention. Rod, we could be in a 20,000 seater, and he could sing "If I Listen," that song, and it sounded like a pin could drop, in the LA form. You know what I mean? He knew how to make everything feel like right here, and he was just like, you could hear his breath, and then the band would go bam, and it was like, whoa, because we rocked. The band doesn't rock in as he has now, but we were like Carmine Rojas, had the David Bowie, just got off the Bowie tour and had the PA system on stage. I mean, me and Golub each had 2 or 3 Marshalls going, it was a real rock and roll show, and Rod taught me how to steal limousines and taught me how to, my first big thing was I want to date a supermodel. That was my biggest ambition. That shows you how stupid I was. I want to date a supermodel. So as soon as we got to New York, I met a 6-foot Swedish model, and it was like, I had to carry her on a bench. She was so tall. And so, those are the things that you get into. You have these ideas and dreams, and I was able to go through a lot of those and realize what was stupid and what wasn't, and learn a lot from it. And I would have stayed with Rod forever if I could have, but I got a gigantic recording contract literally a month after I joined Rod's band, and I had to keep it a secret. I didn't want anyone to know because I was so. Everyone in Rod's band were like my brothers. We were really like the tightest band of brothers. Tony Brock recently wrote me out of the blue, and he said, we were the best band, because he was in a lot of versions of Rod's band. He says, we were the best band Rod ever had. That was just the magic moment. And it's when Rod's career went from, everyone thought it was over, to exploding into this massive new thing. We had our own airplane, it was like a dream. It was like a dream.
No, his second coming was huge. All right, 2 more things. How about Mick Jagger? A little bit on him and how he came into his orbit and being on Saturday Night Live and all that good shit.
I met Jagger a few times and went to some parties at his house and things like that. But I was more friends with Keith and Woody because of Bernard. Always was with Keith and Woody, and I was lucky enough to always be included in that thing. Plus, I played with Rod, so me and Woody used to play guitar a lot and play those old Faces songs. And Bernard would sing. We'd be all drinking and partying out in hotel rooms, and Keith would have these profound conversations. If you were lucky to get, people would sit outside in the hallway trying to get in his room, and you couldn't. And if you could, you're in the inner sanctum, and we'd all sit on the floor, and there was piles of drugs and drinking, and you talk about politics or talk about music or whatever, listen to music. Keith's thing was always like this. It was a pretty great experience, hanging around with Keith. I remember Johnny Depp in the corner studying Keith, and Benicio del Toro, and all these people. If you were getting into that room and hanging out, and it was special. It was great. But you go to Jagger's room, and there'd be like 40 girls and music playing, and Jagger dancing in the middle of them, and all the girls just dancing. I went to Jagger's birthday party once. I was in Tokyo, and I popped out. He was in town, and he was having a birthday party, so I popped in. And this was way before I played with him. And I remember walking in on the dance floor, and there must have been 30 models and him in the middle, and they were all dancing. And then he took his shirt off. It was like, and all the girls took their shirts off, and all the girls were topless, and Jagger was dancing. And it wasn't no sexual grabbing. It was just topless dancing. And I got, God damn, Mick Jagger is the greatest rock star that ever lived. And he is. So years later, you know, I was ready to retire from music. I was sick of the business. I was burned out. I'd just gone from album world tour, album world tour, album world tour for like since 1987, kind of, right? And it was now 2000. I had a lot of money. Then I lost a massive chunk. I lost $1 million in the 2000 stock market crash. And not paying attention what's going on. My girlfriend had died a couple months before that, and I went underground. I went down. I was near death. That sounds dramatic, but it's a fact. I literally didn't care. My stocks, I could have sold them and put stop loss, and I just let it burn. You know, I was just like, I was done, and I wouldn't play my guitar. I didn't want to touch anything. I just was like I was like a dead man walking, really. And at this time I had a new girlfriend, and I'm so bad for her because she didn't sign up for that, and I was just a shell of I was a just done piece of shit, fucking done. It's like I had to go learn how to die. I had to go die before I could learn how to live again. Really, it was like that. And during that time, Mick Jagger, I got a call from Mick Jagger. He was putting a band together. 5 guys got a call, I heard, and I was one of them. And it was like nothing could have got me to play the guitar except for that. So I show up and I audition, and Rusty Anderson, the great Rusty Anderson, was one of my favorite guitar players. My songwriting partner, Parthenon Huxley, he was in Parthenon's band way before, you know, he was in Paul McCartney's band now. Rusty auditioned me, a guy called Tori, who was playing with Michelle and Degacello, I think, and with Morris Day in the time. Doyle Bramhall II, the junior, he auditioned. He auditioned with me actually at the same time. And Dave Navarro. And only people that auditioned. And I got a call a few days later, and I got the gig. It was me. So I had to really get my shit together. It was the only thing that could have got me going. So I helped Jag put the band together, audition, second guitar players, all that shit. And then I started really getting into MDN because it was like he had all these new songs, and Bernard came in. Bernard wasn't there at first, and then I kept saying, we need Bernard, and Bernard showed up, and it was like, God, okay, Bernard's here. It felt like home. The triangle was Mick, me, Bernard, like, you know, right then, and then Matt Clifford was back here doing his thing, and it was like everything just came together. It felt great, and Mick would be singing a part, but it was like, to me, a background part, and I'd be like, why don't you have Bernard sing that? You sing this line, you know. I was able to talk to him that way, and he'd be like, oh, let me try, and then we'd do it, and it was like, oh yeah, thank you, you know. And he'd say thank you, and he was, you know, just like a regular in your band in high school, man. It was just like that, and he was so awesome and so inspiring. And what he did was he got me to remember I needed to stay young, because I was wanting to retire because I was feeling old. I was feeling like, what am I doing? Like a fucking monkey jumping around on stage at, you know, 38 years old or whatever I was then, I don't know. And it was like, he got me to remember that I got to stay young. I got to think young. He thought young. He was like a kid, you know, and it was bitching. I remember being in Shandar having dinner, and he'd come walking in to find me, and people would watch him walk in the room and come and sit at my table and be like acting all cool, like it's no big deal. And inside I was like, fucking yeah, Mick Jagger, just fucking sit at my table. You know, so it was a great experience, and it kind of saved my life, to tell you the God's honest truth, not to sound crazy, but it kind of got me out of it. It took me a lot of years to get better, but that was the start of it that got me going in the right direction.
No, it's not crazy at all. Time and place. Okay, last question. So you produced a lot of things, and as you said, you've done a lot of musical directors. So for the people that have worked for you in either of those capacities, well, either as a music director or producing their work, what would they say about you and about the way you work and all that fun stuff?
I think you'd have to ask them. You know, usually they hate me at first. You know, when you got a football coach and he makes you fucking run laps and yells at you, and you fucking got to do sit-ups, and you, fuck you, I fucking hate you. And then you win the championship and you put that guy on your shoulders, you know? that's how I've always been. I'm an asshole. I'm not a nice MD because my mind's working too fast. I go, stop, 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 stop. No, stop. What are you doing? No. And if you go Google, I've talked about him a lot tonight. I don't know why he keeps coming up, but Google Taylor Hawkins and Stevie Salas articles, and you'll see articles where Taylor talked about how gnarly I was to him. But he'll also always talk about that's what he needed. That's what he needed to become who he became. His son wrote me after he died, Shane, because we both named our kids Shane. And he says, my dad said every drummer needs a guy like you. You gave it to him straight, and you blah blah blah. And I'm like, so do I wish I would have been kinder? I just didn't have it in me to be kinder in 1994 when I met Taylor Hawkins. I was just really like, you don't fucking get to be here unless you fucking earn it. That's how I used to feel. You're lucky enough to be in the big game, and there's a million guys that want to take your place. So you need to step the fuck up, or you're gonna fucking get blown out. And that's how hardcore the music business to me was. This whole, everybody's good in their own way. We're all like, me and Fowler and all of us are like, fuck you. No, you're not. That sucks. You can be better. And we were kind of all hardcore like that. You know what I mean? You couldn't be nice and hold your position in that, because there's how many guitar players want to do the gigs I've done? There's got to be 20 million that's standing in line just waiting to try to take my place. I remember I was playing in Austin at the sports arena down the street here, the old one, with Rod Stewart. And I was almost getting fired every week when I was in Rod's band because I didn't know what I was doing. And I remember I met the guitar player. There's Dave Grissom and a guy called Lance that lives here in Austin, really cool guy, great guitar player. And I remember they were both there at sound check, and I met him because I go, that's Dave Grissom. He played with John Mellencamp then. I go, I know that guy. He plays with John Mellencamp. How cool. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Well, I came to find out later, when I was living in Austin, Lance came over to help me do some digitizing of some of my old music. And keep in mind, this was my first band, so I was nobody back then. But now everyone knows, they knew who I am, and it's like, whatever, it's all good. But he goes, we were all there because we heard that somebody was leaving the band, and one of the guitar players was leaving, and so we were there to check out the band and figure out which one of us was going to take the gig. And he goes, I remember telling Grissom, I don't know quite how to pronounce his name, Dave, you should take it. And he goes, no, well, if you want it, you should take it. And they're both like, are you crazy? I'd have been like, fuck you, I'm taking it. Well, I said to him, I go, really? So I was almost getting fired so many times. I don't think Jeff Golub was going anywhere. I think I was getting ready to get fired, and one of those guys was going to take my place. And thank God that didn't happen, because maybe you would never know me to this day. That I may have never recovered from that.
Are you no nonsense when you're producing? Like, you expect these people to come in with their shit ready to go and lay down. It's not for rehearsing and practicing and partying in the studio. Like, what's your studio style?
I don't care if you party. I don't care if you practice. I don't care if you any of those. I just care that when you get down, you fucking make it real, and it's for real. It's like you got to find that. Like, remember Bernard? It wasn't real. He was searching for it, but Bernard knew it wasn't real. He wasn't going like, that's the shit. That's good the way it is. He wasn't like that. He was like, nah, fuck. He was trying to get it. So you can't get mad at him for that. But when it's not real, you want the real. I mean, Taylor Hawkins, the first time he ever went in a professional studio was with me and Bernard in New York City at Sorcerer Sound. And he'd start a song at 90 beats per minute and finish at 120. That's unacceptable, but he knew it, and he knew he had to work on it. He didn't say, fuck you guys, this is the way I play. It's like he knew it, and he worked so fucking hard. And even when he was in the Foo Fighters, he would call me all the time and be like, God, you know how it feels, how horrible I feel, because I'm struggling to get this track, and I know Dave could just sit down and do it in one take. And I'm like, listen, Taylor, you need to let yourself off the hook now. You've made it. Grohl's got you there for a reason. You've got to stop killing yourself. Because that's when he almost died one time. He had an OD in London. This pressure he would put on himself to be great. In a lot of ways, he carried this weight, and he didn't have to carry it anymore. And it started with me, and I've always kind of felt bad about that. It's like he carried that weight, but he wanted to be great. And when you want to be great, there's a difference between wanting it and doing what it takes. And doing what it takes is most of the time it's not that fun.
Wow. That is a great place to wrap up right there. I told you guys this was going to be amazing, that this man had amazing stories. I can't thank him enough for doing this again with me, as I said, since I screwed up a week ago. But I think we did even better. So, Stevie Salas, thank you so much for your time, man.
All right. Stay in touch and have a good time, brother. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Love you. See you soon. Bye-bye.